Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh b'dvarei.
Amen.
Okay, good morning, Chava. Good Erev Shabbos. Good Chodesh. What a privilege to enter this brand new month. Ani Hashem Rafecha. B'siyata d'shmaya, coming in to Torah and Dalet as we continue our journey through Sefer Likutei Moharan. Today's shir be'ezras Hashem has been sponsored by Regina Devorah for the Yartzeit of Rabba Bushka, nishmas Sofa Bat Rosa, and by Reb Bernard Bollag, nishmas his father, B'mar Moshe Ezriel ben Chava Ya'akov, also by Yitzchak, Gedalyah ben Ilanit, for the zechus of Menashe, Gavriel ben Chava, and Avraham Shlomo ben Ilanit, and by Zev Klein, nishmas his parents of Barinder Simcha and Ya'akov ben Yeshעיהו. Also, as a zechus for shidduchim for Yehudis, Adina bas Elisheva, Rochel, Dovid ben Gedalyah, Shimi Ben Geira, Netana ben Micha Machnaz, Dovid ben Yael, Nach Avraham ben Sarah Rezel, Zev ben Rebkah, all the symbols of Klal Yisrael, also dedicated as a zechus for Shlomo, for Chaim Yeshua ben Chaim Miriam, and of course for all of Klal Yisrael, all the Chayalim, and everybody should make the right decisions with regard to the future of Am Yisrael in Eretz Yisrael and around the world. Be'ezras Hashem. Okay, so we continue with Torah and Dalet b'siyata d'shmaya. Yesterday we finished the lengthy exposition on the idea of Shvir Sakelim and the nitzotzes to Kedusha that are in everything, which Rabbi Nachman used as a metaphor, letters, broken letters that are supposed to be integrated into our narrative, right? Given the opportunity to leave their broken, shattered, diminutive form and to enter into unity, right? By coming into contact with the Koyim Shlema of the 10 spheres that we had learned about in terms of the embodiment of all the avodas of the day, Shena, and then tzitzis, tefillin, Torah, Tefillah, Maso, Matan, and then we were speaking just in the terms of Maso, Matan, and the transference of objects from one person's domain to another person. That as a person experiences life, they're going to come into contact with the things that they need in order to rectify, first of all, their own nefesh, ruach, neshama, but also to be mashlim, the nitzotzes, the oisias that are in that thing, to elevate them and to bring about the revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's unity in the world. So that's what we had finished with yesterday. All in the context of course, trying to remember Olam Haba, trying to remember a realm of unity, realizing that we're here to manifest that realm of unity in the world, not just to think in a more limited sense of Olam Haba from the standpoint of schar, but to think about the ultimate reward of being able to live a unified life, an Olam Habadika life, to be able to reveal an Olam Habadika energy in Olam Hazeh. We continue with Ois Dalet, and the tzaddik over here is going to speak, having spoken already about Malchus, right, and about Maso Matan, and about how this world requires us living consciously in order to fulfill it, and in order to reveal the energy of Olam Haba within it, which is our whole tachlis of Tikkun Malchus. Rabbi Nachman now speaks about 3 experiences that David HaMelech had with 3 different individuals. And David, of course, is the reflection of the sphere of Malchus and that realm. And we're going to learn about the symbol of those 3 things. So the paragraph continues as follows. This is Ois Dalet on the bottom of page Samach Aleph Amud Beis. And he says like this: Ukudei lishmar hazikaron hanal. In order for a person to guard their remembrance, in order for them not to lose touch with that realm from which we came and to which we are going. A person needs to be careful to guard their eye. And this goes back to what we learned in Torah Nun Aleph, about how eyesight is extremely crucial. Because if a person's eyesight is clear, then the Rebbe told us, Gesundheit, you see one thing and you see it as being one. But if a person's eyes are not working properly, so then you could have doubled over vision. You see one thing, you think it's 2, right? Which is the ultimate fundamental misnomer with regard to living in this world, seeing a world of multiplicity, and that masks and hides the achdus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence. So a person, if we want to stay connected to Olam Haba, have to be very careful not to fall into Ra Ayin, which is itself l'b'chinas misas halev, the death of the heart. Because we find in the pasuk that remembering and memory relates to the eye. We have memory devices, right? We like, for example, in Shulchan Aruch, if a person needs to remember something, they can tie a little string around their finger, right? And that will remind them of, let's say, a change in davening, saying Talamatar, right? Or saying or not V'sein Talamat, or Maranatol, right? V'sein Bracha, and different elements, so that a person has something to remind them. When you see something visually, it's going to stimulate your memory, right? Seeing is related to remembering, and that's why we have the tzitzis, Re'isem Oisai, right? And then Uzachartem, seeing is remembering, L'zikarein Beinenecha, Ki Ashikcha Ba'al Yedei Ra Ayin. When a person's eyes are no longer seeing properly, that leads to shikha. And a person lives in a world where there's nothing here that's going to remind me of a realm of unity. I don't find divinity anywhere, right? Everywhere I look, there's nothing that's going to stir me to remember God. Chas v'shalom. A person can live in the world in such a way. That's called Ra Ayin. And that comes because like we quoted this pasuk earlier, Kimes Milev. Death is associated with shikha, living in a world that's cold and dark. The opposite of what we were learning in Torah Aleph about Yaakov Avinu living in a world of Or. Yaakov Avinu living in a world of Shemesh, right? A world that's Meir, where the Chachma of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Ta'ir, like we said, Panav Lufanav, where all of his paths are illuminated ahead of him. That's a world of life. Life is associated with warmth, right? When a body goes cold, it's dead, right? Life is warmth. Life is light. And that's one way of living in this world. But another way of living in this world, like we learned, is Esav, who doesn't see the light of Ches, which is the light of unity, Chachma Ilah reflected in the Nun. All he sees is a world of Malchus to Sitra Achra. All he sees, we learned about this in Torah Lamed as well, he sees the Dalet, right, of Malchus, of Echad, that's associated with unity, splinter into the four Malchuyas to Sitra Achra, which are warring with one another, which are completely disparate and distinct, that serve as the root for all of our mistakes, and living in a world of multiplicity. These are just different words, different metaphors for the same concept. We're trying to communicate this just to be able to be able to understand it. So that's shikha and that's misa. And the Rebbe in Torah Nun, no, not Nun. The Rebbe in Torah Mem, was it Mem? Was it Lamed Zayin maybe? Yeah. In Torah Lamed Zayin, the Rebbe, if you remember, had set up within our own lower midas Adam, Tzura, Chachma, Or, Chaim, Zikarin, Nefesh, and that was all on one side. And then that was in conflict with Behema, Chaimer, Sichlus, Chayshach, Maves, Shikha, Guf. So here also you see that the Rebbe associates Or and Chaim with Zikarin, right? All these things are already bound up. We had the same idea in Torah and Aleph and in other places as well.
First day of the story.
What's that?
First day of the story of Chassid, the
seven beggars. Yeah. Which Nikuda?
The blind person who was the guy who remembers.
Ah. Eyesight. Beautiful. Beautiful, because he really had just better eyesight than anybody, right? And that's remembering, exactly. He's able to remember the furthest back. Okay, so says the Rebbe like this. Ki Ra Ayin, just another raya that seeing is connected to remembering. Ra Ayin umisas halev himachina achas. When a person's eye, is not functioning properly, so that's going to affect their heart. Kishuryana de'ena b'libatalya, because the health of one's eye is talui on the heart, and if a person's eyesight is not working, so then the doctors would check the heart, because those two things were connected, or at least on some subliminal metaphysical level are connected, and that's reflected in the ancient medicine. Okay, that's the way that it was. Now the Rebbe introduces us to the first individual who was in conflict with David HaMelech, and that is Naval. The Alkei Naval, this is earlier on in David HaMelech's life, in Malachim Aleph, in Shmuel Aleph, Shahaya Ra Ayin. He did not want to give David HaMelech food. He was a very wealthy man. David was traveling with a few of his compatriots, and Naval, right, Kishma Kainhu, right, was a, what Naval is, yeah, no, that comes from a different word actually. Naval is with a vase. He was a scoundrel. Naval means a scoundrel, like a novel versus satire, right? He did not want to give David HaMelech food. And it says about him, Nemar Boy, Vayamas Levi Bekir. Ultimately, as a result, he died from this, and his heart died within him. And what was he? He was a Ra Ayin. And so you find that there's a relationship between his stinginess, right, which is hinted to in the word Ra Ayin. He wasn't living with histopkus, right, because that's what it is. He needed everything for himself. He wasn't living with the consciousness of realizing I have enough. That's the consciousness going back to the dichotomy between Yaakov and Esav. That's the consciousness of Yaakov Avinu, Yeshli Kol, which we've spoken so much about, vis-a-vis or in relation to, or in contrast with, Esav's consciousness of Yeshli Rav, where he has a lot, but he doesn't have Kol. And that was novel. He had Ra Ayin, Memela, Vayamas Liba Bikirbai. He had a bechina of Misas Halev within him. Umisas Halev, another Rebbe adds another element, he bechina Shivrei Luchais. It's an aspect of the brokenness of the tablets. Leiv, hu bechinas luchas, because the heart is an aspect of the luchas. But bechinas kasvim al luach libecha, inscribe them on the luach of your heart, the luchais, right? The tablet that we have within our heart. V'shikcha hi al yidei shivra luchas, and we know that the Gemara in Eruvin tells us forgetfulness, forgetting the Torah at least, comes on account of the brokenness of the luchas. Like the Gemara in Eruvin tells us in Dalet, if the luchas had not been broken, there would be no forgetfulness in the world. So you see again another remez to the correlation between Ra Ayin and the shikha in one's heart. And therefore, if a person wants to live in a consciousness of zikarayin, it has to do with the eyesight. In other words, it has to do with perspective. And the Rebbe is saying, well, it's a little bit funny because in order for me to have eyes that see properly, I already need to be in a posture of remembering. But the Rebbe says, no, it's bayim ka'achas. This world is full of reminders for those who are looking for them. And that goes back to the Ramazan. Right, I get this question all the time. Anytime I speak about this, right? The question you could just assume will be asked is: isn't this a one-way conversation? You don't hear Hashem speaking back. You're speaking about this as a sicha bein l'levein kaina, like it's some kind of conversation, but it's really one way. What kind of relationship is that? That's not healthy. You're busy talking to a wall the whole time. You never hear HaKadosh Baruch Hu talking back. And it's a good question. It's an important question. But of course, the answer is obvious. Of course, Hashem speaks back. But Hashem doesn't have a mouth like we do. It doesn't have WhatsApp. As far as I know, this number is not on WhatsApp. Like he's not going to email you. Like, of course Hashem speaks back. When a person is in the consciousness of his spaydudus, in other words, to that person, Hashem is as real to them as any of the human beings' consciousness that they experience in their lives. And they literally spend time, adequate time, proper time, every single day, directly with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So then your mind is now open to perceive the communication that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be sending. In Torah and Dalet, that is the Ramazim. So the Ramazim are there. The question is, do I have the mind and the eyes to be able to pick up on them? Like we said, memory relies on seeing. One kind of person walks through the park and not only doesn't see indicators of Hashem's presence pointing me to contact the Creator, all I see is gashmias, all I see is physicality. This world shuts Hashem away. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, it maybe can be accessed in some meditative way, but that's so distant so as to be possibly even denied in an extreme sense. There is no spiritual realm. All there is this world, like the philosophers who said the only thing that exists is chaimer, like the Rebbe told us in Torah and Beis. This world is mechuyev hametzias. And then the next guy, maybe even they're walking right next to each other, walks through the park, and literally everything he looks at is reminding him about the yichud and the achdus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealing himself in this way. It's called a tree. What a giloi are. You just spend so much time with a tree. Just a tree. The trunk, the bark, the roots, and the whole Tu B'Shvat. You know how much Torah there is on Tu B'Shvat? Every time you see a tree, you encounter the entire Torah of Tu B'Shvat, if you want. Or you just see a tree, right? But if a person sees a tree and engages with it and reflects on his mizbainin, on the form of a tree, what incredible technology. Like what awesome, super hyper advanced supernatural technology, right? Is a tree. It's awesome. It's remarkable, especially a fruit tree, especially this time of year. And you see the trees that are blossoming and the branches and the twigs and the leaves and the fruits. Unbelievable. That's one tree, right? So that's not a reminder. That's not lizikar and beinanecha. That's not Re'isam Oyser Zachartem is Kol Mitzvahs Hashem. Of course it is. As are the clouds, as is the sky, as is certainly another human being, which is even more advanced technology than a tree. We can imagine such a thing. Or an animal, or anything. It depends on the way that we look at the world. We need to guard our eyes, right, in that way. Nimsa, says the Rebbe, it emerges, She'ikra Shikha Hi al Yedei Ra Ayin. The primary forgetfulness is a result of our perspective. Do we expect to find reminders, or do we expect to see a world that shuts Hashem away? Shu b'chinas misas halev. And then if I live in a world where I think that everything that I encounter is hiding Hashem's presence, so then not only doesn't the world remind me of Hashem, on the contrary, it does exactly the opposite. It pushes me further away. If it pushes me further away, then I am misas halev. I'm dead in some fundamental way. I'm not living in the proper way. This goes back to Torah and Beis when we spoke about Hashem being the only true reality, the mechuyev hametzias. And anything that's lived in alignment with Him shares in the mechuyev hametzias. They become more real, and through them, the whole world becomes more real. But the other option is just as available, right? If we're distant from the mechuyev hametzias, our lives stop sharing in that light. And if our lives stop sharing in that light, everything else stops sharing in that light. It's simple as it is. It is that simple. Nimsa. She'ikra shikhi ayde Ra Ayin, which is chas v'shalom, a form of death. Risham afilu b'chayim, kriyim mesim. Only v'atam adveikim Hashem adekechem chayim kulchem yayim. If not, and you're not connected to the Eitz Chaim Yilamachazikim, or the Eitz HaChaim, then you're living a life in the Eitz Das Toivera, and then you're living in duality, and you're living in a world that hides the unity and the revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that's desperate to manifest and to burst into reality by virtue of us coming along and recognizing it. Shi b'china shivrei lucha shemisham ikra shikha misas halev is the brokenness of our heart. Brokenness of the heart is the bechina of the luchas that are broken, and we learned that that's where shikha comes from. That's the bechina of navel. Then we have Avshalom. Avshalom, of course, later on in Shmuel Beis, in David HaMelech's life, David HaMelech's son who rebels, horrible, tragic, just really mind-bending kind of experience that David HaMelech had to go through, being hounded by his own son. This is a different kind of ayin hara, right? Einai ra'a, a different kind of way of looking toward the kingship, right? Naval was stingy, that was Ra Ayin. Avshalom has a different kind of Ra Ayin. He looks, sees David HaMelech, and wants what he has. By Avshalom also it says misas halev shenemar, because the pasuk says v'yikach shloisha shivatim v'yiskaim b'leiv Avshalom. Avshalom gets tangled in a tree, right, by his hair. He's riding his donkey, his very beautiful hair, and he is killed by taking spears, I think, staff sticks, and by yiskaim b'leiv Avshalom, and being plunged into also his heart, misas halev. And therefore we find lahiniach ben zachar. The Gemara tells us, the pasuk tells us, but the Gemara elaborates, he did not leave over a ben zachar. That was the curse, ki pagam bazikarin, because it's telling us he blemished in the concept of zikarin. His relationship with Malchus, with David HaMelech, which is this worldliness, was one of Ra Ayin. That's how it is. With Naval, with Avshalom, were the aspect of Ra Ayin toward Malchus. Memela, it's going to affect your heart. Memela ki pagam bezikarin, so you didn't have a ben zachar. Zachar meaning male, but zachar also, of course, meaning to remember. Al yedei Ra Ayin k'niskele el. Now, but David HaMelech alav shalom, the third individual that we encounter in David HaMelech's life, as he's barach azmi malchusav ibn Avshalom, he's running away with his kingship on account of Avshalom, the kilal aisai Shimi Ben Geira, and he is cursed by Shimi Ben Geira. Amar, and David HaMelech tells his people, don't fight with him, don't say anything to him, let him curse me. Ula yira Hashem be'eni. Maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu will see my pain. Maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu will see my disgrace, and on account of my being embarrassed and not responding, Taravav, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will have mercy on me. Says Rabbi Nachman, look at the words. Ula yira Hashem be'eni. Be'eni daika. The eye. Ki misha roish anayfil Ra Ayin, because a person who feels that they're falling under the influence of Ra Ayin, they're being looked at improperly. from the standpoint of Ayin Hara, when a person feels that they're not capable of withstanding this experience, they need to run away. But if you can fix it, then you need to fix it. But over here, the klipa was so strong, there was no tikkun. A person needs to reflect on the Ra Ayin. So over here it's interesting because here he's speaking about the Ayin Hara that's coming from someone else, right, toward him. The broader metaphor, although he's finding Ramazim in these three experiences in the life of David HaMelech, are really speaking about a person's own Ayin Hara, right? Meaning our own experience of Ra Ayin. But the Rebbe lifts the metaphor like it's an externalized experience of these three individuals. You have Naval, Avshalom, Shimi Ben Geira, and they become internalized from the standpoint of really reflecting what aspect of shikha am I stuck in? On what level? There are many, as we see, there are many different kinds of Ra Ayin. Let's say this is one form of looking at the world in a way that's going to prevent you from finding Hashem, which is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world and Hashem is mechalik his nasos to every person in accordance with what they need and what their sharish neshama is, and every person has their tafkid. When a person ignores or denies the presence of Hashem, how? By looking at someone else's life and wanting what they have. That's a form of shikha, right? That's a form in that moment of forgetting the reality that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, runs the world. It is precise with the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu unfolds the hanhaga of everything happening. And that's a form of shutting Hashem out. That's a form of shikha. When a person goes ahead and interacts with that, then we need to subjugate this with the root of his nasos. There needs to be something rectified in the root of malchus, which means to discover my own dignity, to recognize I have exactly the position that I'm supposed to have. This is the role that I'm supposed to play. Shebechinas Mashiach, v'ushayrish hamalchus, bebechinas vayitin oiz lemalkai, vayarem keren lemashichai. When there's a Yarim Keren of Meshichai, that's rectifying and giving strength to a person's Malchus, and then a person will be rectified from Ra Ayin v'hu b'chinas Toiv Ayin. And that will mean that a person is living with Toiv Ayin, with a good eye, b'chinas Yifei Einayim v'Toiv Ra'i hanemer b'David shu Mashiach. That's why David HaMelech counteracted the Ra Ayin that again was externally projected onto him, right? But we're speaking on an internal level. We all have our navel, right, within us, from the standpoint of stinginess toward others. That's, I want everything. I can't, give too much tzedakah or be too generous right? I'm very protective. That's navel. Right? Avshalom is its own thing. Avshalom wants the melucha of someone else, right? Shimi Ben Geira doesn't necessarily want the malchus, but is full of spite toward others, right? These are three different forms of shikha salev. Because if I was mamish living in consciousness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, using all of life as a device for memory, to remember HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so then all these three things would be metukan. Number one, I live with his stopgus, and so I'm capable of being generous and giving to other people because I don't feel that urgent necessity to focus only on myself. That's A. That's the tikkun for navel. Then you have Avshalom, where a person genuinely understands that whatever they have in life is exactly what they need and where they're supposed to be. And then they have the tikkun for Shimi Ben Geira, which is to rectify this, if you can. If not, there needs to be a tzarich levreach mimenu, right? And that's what we see David HaMelech running away. But ultimately, the rectification of Ra Ayin is Toiv Ayin. Bebechinas Yifei Einayim v'Toiv Ra'i. David HaMelech is the ultimate tikkun of all these things. David HaMelech, more than anybody else, perhaps. First of all, on account just of the practical strata, on the level of David HaMelech's nature, of who he was, of the life that he lived, of the posture of Tehillim, of showing up with Anivos, of Tfilah Ani Kiyatov. David HaMelech is living super consciously of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? His relationship with Hashem is one, again, as we're going to see later on in the Torah, of Hispaidus. David HaMelech is the pinnacle, like the archetypal, the quintessential mispoided. That's what David HaMelech is. In other words, David HaMelech doesn't just do his spoidedus, but like we said in the past, David HaMelech says in Tehillim, Va'ani tefillah, I am his spoidedus, right? That's what he was. His whole mitzias was his spoidedus. The Mela David HaMelech's whole mitzias is Toiv Ayin. David HaMelech's whole mitzias is Mashiach, meaning it's a malchus that's redeemed. He is David HaMelech. He is the manifestation of the sphere of Malchus, but it's a Geula dik Malchus. It's a Malchus of revelation. It's a Malchus of the fixing of all of these things, which are the Bechina of Ra Ayin and Misas Halev, which we find by Naval, which we find by Avshalom. And then ultimately David HaMelech just goes more deeply into his inner world of the Tikkun of Malchus, the Tikkun of Mashiach, in order to rectify these three things, to battle Ra Ayin with Toiv Ayin. That's David HaMelech. Toiv Ayin hu yivayrach. Now we continue with an interesting Gemara in Nida Daf Chav Dalet Amud Beis. Let's read it first inside. Tanya Abba Shaul Omer. Abba Shaul said, Koiver Meisim Ayisi. I was a gravedigger. Pamachas, one time, Niftecha Ma'ara Mitachtai. The grave, I was digging a grave and a whole thing opened up in front of me. And I found myself standing in the eye socket of a corpse up until my nose. When I looked behind me, right, or when I walked like backwards and I stepped out of that, not a very pleasant place to stand, I imagine. Amru, I said to myself, Ayin shalav shalom haya. That must be the eye of Avshalom. Right? Sasim v'chasim. What is going on here? What kind of Gemara is this? Says the Heilige Rebbe Zechus Yergan, he decodes it for us. Abba Shaul. This is the deeper meaning of what Abba Shaul says. Koiver mesim hayisi. I was a grave digger. Abba Shaul ishtadol l'sakin tamid es hara ayin anikra misa. Koiver mesim hayisi. I wanted to, if you read it literally, to bury the dead. Right? Koiver mesim. Right? His job was to dig the graves and to be involved in burying the dead. So on a metaphorical level, what it means is he wanted to get rid of all Ra Ayin from the world. Ra Ayin is v'china of misa. Koiver mesim hayisi. I wanted to be masakin Ra Ayin misa salev from the world. Now, Pamachas, while I was doing that, Avodah niftach ma'ara mitachtai. The grave, a cave rather, opened up under me as I was digging. Ma'ara and b'chinas dveikus, as the Rebbe, Ma'ara is hinting to a deep, deep level of dveikus, b'chinas k'ma'ar ish v'loyos, like it says in Malachim, with regard to the building of the Beis Hamikdash, Shlomo's Beis Hamikdash, right? All around, you had the design of the kruvim all around the Beis Hamikdash, Kemar Ish V'Layos, and the kruvim were intertwined one with the other, Kemar Ish V'Layos, right? Being intertwined one with the other. That's the Bechina of Ma'ara, which is a reference to Dveikus. Mitachtai, a certain kind of Dveikus that is hinted to with the word Mitachtai. What does that mean? Underneath. Hainu Bechinas Emes. This is the Bechina of truth. The Bechinas Emes me Eretz Titzmach. Truth is embedded in the earth and it will open up from underneath us. Ki Toiv Ayin hu yivayrach. We said Toiv Ayin hu yivayrach. Right? It is a person who's living with Toiv Ayin, not the aspect of Ra Ayin. Shikha. A person is living a consciousness of Hispoidedus, of Zikarayin. That Toiv Ayin hu yivayrach. That will bring all the brachas into the world. V'ha brachos. In Bechinas Emes. Blessings are an aspect of truth. The one who is blessed in the land is blessed with the blessing of the faithful, true God. Because he was constantly seeking the truth. Goes back to Torah Nun Aleph. Emes. Emes is Echad. Sheker is multiple. Emes is echad. On account of him being a koiver mason, he wanted to be masakin, misa, shikchas halev, Ra Ayin, living in a world of multiplicity. So because he was a koiver mason, hamachas niftecha me'ara mitachtai. He had a dveikus on account of his emes. Ma'ara mitachtai. Va'amadati begalgal einai Shalmeis ad chatmi, and I stood in the eye socket of a mace up until my nose. Therefore, on account of the dveikus, because on a simple level in the Gemara, it just happened, right? He was digging, and all of a sudden, you realize this is not just regular ground. There's a cave here, and it opens up, and he falls down, and he finds himself standing there. Right? The way that the Rebbe is learning it, it's not like the ground opened up under me. No, this was what he was doing. He was being misakin consciously, this inyan of shikchas halev of misa, and on account, therefore, of the dveikus, Ha'emadati atzmi b'sakana. I stood b'sakana lichnes begalgal she'eno shal meis. I stood myself in the eye socket of the meis, haina Ra Ayin, in the aspect of Ra Ayin. And it was so deep that I needed mamish to tap into my nitzitz of Mashiach. I needed to go so deeply into belief in a redeemed world, into a belief in the possibility of redemption for everyone. I needed to access my dignity. We're going to learn more about this in Torah and Vav. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. We're in Torah and Dalet, which is quite long, and Hey is quite long, but it is very possible that we're going to be learning in Vav right around Shavuos time. I mean, it's hafla of a fella. Like, it's very, very shaykh that we're literally the week before Shavuos going to be up to the Shavuos Torah. So let's see how this plays out. Again, we don't plan. HaKadosh Baruch Hu plans, so don't plan this out at all. But we're going to learn over there about how every person has a malchus. Every person has a malchus. Every person has a nitzitz Mashiach. Every person has within themselves their melucha. So in order to battle the nihilism, the apathy, the cynicism, not the stoicism in a certain way, but in a negative sense, of living in a world with a leiv even, really, with a heart that's a heart of stone. Pare, like we learned a few days ago, right? The Lamed Beis Elokim, closed up. In order to be able to free that and to open that, so there needs to be the aspect of Mashiach. I need to be able to access that part of me that recognizes there's meaning in the world and I have meaning in it. I have to access the Bechin of Mashiach in order to subjugate the depth of the Ra Ayin, to say, no, I can do something. It's like, I'm sent to this world to do something. Like I say all the time, it isn't that we just happen to be here, now figure out what to do. Why was I put here in the first place? Like, what am I doing here? How can what I am good at / like doing become a vessel to actually impact the world in such a way that I literally, genuinely feel that I am doing what I was born to do. Right? What I was born to do. Why I came here. That's reflective of who I really am, what I really am. A nitzat tzaliki. A chelik alikami mal mamish. Right? That's Mashiach. That's the ultimate tikkun for Ra Ayin. Is to mamish discover and uncover that nitzutz that I have. The world is a meaningful place. I can live with an elevated consciousness and I can help other people access that. And I can slowly but surely, in my own way, bring more zikaron to the world. Help people remember. That's the main job of a tzaddik, is to help people remember. That's what they did. You came into contact with a tzaddik, the tzaddik is reminding you. He's looking in your eyes. He's reminding you who you are. Right? Why you're here. And a person lives, plugged in. That's what that experience is. And guess what? Just like after a person comes into contact with a memory device, let's say that they set for themselves, they tied some kind of string around them, to remember something. And then time passes. And nishkachti k'meis melev, like we said from the pasuk, naturally, with time we forget. Even a person could experience such a Gilui Elikos, and this is a very obvious example, right? We experience an Ilan Yom Kippur, after a whole Yom Kippur, and we have such a high moment of Dveikus, and then, I would say 2 days later, but it's like 2 hours later, we forget again, right? There's a revelation of incredible Hashgacha Pratis in someone's life. They're just overwhelmed sometimes by the Gilui Elikos that they have to go and tell everybody the story, and it's just like, oh my God, those moments where you're just standing there like, Hashem is winking at me. Like this is such a direct communication. And maybe I can't even communicate it to someone else, but like I know, given my life, and this is just, let's say, 3 days later, it passes. That's the way that it is. But then you go back to the Nakuda of Tzaddik. You go back to the Nakuda of, but that's what a Tzaddik is. Starting off the day with Likutei Moharan Yomi, like it anchors us, I think, in this consciousness. We're coming to the Tzaddik. And every day, we're getting reminded. The Bechina of Mashiach. You were put in this world for a reason. This world is a reasonable world, right? There could be reason in this world. Hashem is the Sibas Kol HaSibas, the reason behind all reasons. There's meaning in this world, but there's Bechira in this world. You're either going to live with Zikarein, or you're going to live with Shikha. You're either going to live with Chaim, or you're going to live with Maves. These are the two options. Says the Heilige Rebbe, what's the remez in this episode of Zeh? Who ad chatmi? I stood in that galgal einoi, up to my nose. The nose, we know in Likutei Moharan, we've seen this a few times, Torah base, is an aspect of Mashiach, Shubechinas Ruach Apenu, Mashiach Hashem. Ruach Apenu, Mashiach Hashem. I was just reflecting on Yantiv. I've noticed this in the past, but I noticed it again. On Yantiv, it's a phenomenal thing. In the tefillah that we say, in Ribbon Shalom. Isn't that? I think maybe I could have, I may have mentioned this in the past.
Now it was like
jumps out at you, right? We say by the Ribbon Shalom, which is a very beautiful little tefillah, right? By the Hashem Karacham Echanun, by Psicha on Yantiv. In there we say V'yikuyam Banu, and it should be fulfilled in us. And then we go along and we quote a pasuk that is very obviously referring to Mashiach, right? V'nacha alav ruach chachma bina rach etzug v'razda rach das v'yiras Hashem. Thank you, Eitan Katz. I would not have remembered that pasuk without that song, right? It's speaking about Mashiach. And here we say, all of us, we even use, if I'm not mistaken, oh no, it says Yikuyam B, right? Okay, Kavalt, it's even deeper. Each of us individually say, let that pasuk be fulfilled in me. I think I'm going to be Mashiach. Like, no, I have a nishmas of Mashiach inside of me. And so do you. And so do you. If I'm not mistaken, somebody came to Lubavitch Rebbe, if I'm not mistaken, and said something very, like, overtly messianic to him, right? Like, are you Mashiach? Like, could you reveal? And I think he responded something like, yeah, of course. Like, because everybody has a nishmas of Mashiach. Everybody has a nishmas of Mashiach.
Just quickly, I mean, I think I got this from someone. There's different pshatim why the Rebbe gave the dollar bills, but one of them is mamish this nakuda, like he's a tzaddik hador, because this is my mom, take a bit of me. Here's a dollar, he has a little nitzoitz in everyone.
That's it.
There's a Mashiach in everyone.
That's it, right? The tzaddik being the neshama kalelis means that all of the neshamas share in that. And everybody has their nitzoitz. Everybody has their nitzoitz. So that's he says, I stood up into my nose. That's the bechina of Ruach HaPeinu Mashiach Hashem. That's the tikkun. To live out of the part of me that believes that I could be redeemed. That's the tikkun. Because again, the shikha isn't just how I approach the world, because that's one thing. What shikha really means is how I approach myself. How I see my role in the world. Looking at a world that shuts Hashem out means that all of a sudden I am cut off from the sharish of Chava. It's a bechin of kares. It's a bechin of misas and neshama, misas and nefesh.
And Yantiv is when the Yidden came to the Beis HaMikdash and had the direct visual connection more.
Mamish. And Yantiv also we learned in Torah Lamed. By Yeshasef Shmuel Agag, right? By Yeshasef, right? He cut him up, and that's the bechina of. We learned over there Shavuos, Pesach, and Sukkot, right? And we learned that Agag is the bechina of the Klalius of the Dalet Malchus Sitracha. Tikkun HaMalchus happens on Yantiv, right? There's a Ara Panim that's Meir on Yantiv. We're going to learn more about that in Kuf Lamed Hey, I believe. So it's mamish this nekuda. Then he said, "Ukeshachazarti la'achayrai amrli." When I stepped back, that I was told, "Einai shal Avshalom haisa." That was the eye of Avshalom. Oh, they're starting early because of Rosh Chodesh. Okay, let's go quickly. It was the inyan of Avshalom. Asur b'chinas kasher shel tefillin. Okay, there's a little bit involved. Sheb'chinas ha'chayra kamar chacham niskal v'r'isiyas ha'chayra is a kasher shel tefillin. When he says, I stepped back, the bechina of, yes, fixing the eye of Avshalom, which is Ra Ayin, that's the bechina of after the tikkun, I recognize that the tikkun was on account of Mashiach. What's Achayrai? Achayrai is the bechina of Mashiach. Because Melech is Melech Asur B'Rahatim, B'Rihite Moichin. Malchus is connected with the way that I think. That's the speed of my thoughts, B'Rihite Moichin. And it's Melech Asur B'Rahatim. Asur means tied, and tying is a bechina of tefillin, and that's on the back. That's Achayrai, right? Re'isias Achayrai. Kesher Shal Tefillin. Shebechinas Achar Kamam Chacham Nitzchal V'Re'isias Achar is a Kesher Shal Tefillin. V'Zeu V'Hoysa Nefesh Adoni Tzur B'Tzara Chaim and Ember B'David. All right, let the soul of my master be bound with the bonds of life. Hanu kesher shel tefillin, because tefillin is chayim. Kamem chacham zechus l'bracha. Kol aminei tefillin zechus l'chayim. Shenem Hashem aleichem yichyu. Like we learned multiple times, tefillin is life. Tefillin is zikarim. Uluzikarim beinenecha. V'alkein loy amru loy she'ina shel shalom ha'isa ad shechazal ha'achayrav. Ki lehayedei mikodim izeh efshar loy hayem esaken atzmi kokach likanis Ra Ayin kazek yu sakana Gedalyah. It was such a deep Ra Ayin. Maybe they would have told him to try to be misaken it, but he went in. He stood ad chatni. He connected with the right kishachazarti la'achayrai to the bechina of re'isias achayrai, the kesher shel tefillin, the bechina of zikarim beinenecha, that aspect of chayim, right, of remembering. And with that, he overcame Misas Halev, and he was able to be Misak the inyan of Avshalom, of Ra Ayin, to live in a world of Zikarin, and to see the Remazim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to remember Olam Haba. Wishing everybody a beautiful Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. We will see everybody next week.
מלך חי וקיים על כל נשימה שאני